Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. I haven't done any videos in the last 2 weeks as I was traveling, and there's so much that happened since then, since my last video, which was about Zelensky's Mirage. And I'd like to discuss the latest events, but in a certain focus, which is under the title Domestic Pressures. Because it seems to me over the last 10 days, there were so many important developments in this issue of Ukrainian-Russian war. But most importantly for me, it seems to me, are the domestic issues and domestic pressures on all major players. Specifically, it is on Putin, on Trump, and on Zelensky. So this is what we're going to discuss today. And I start with domestic pressures on President Putin. We start with the 10th of May ultimatum. As you all know, on the 10th of May, the coalition of the willing, which is Starmer and Macron and Tusk of Poland and Zelensky, they all kind of met and decided to persuade Trump to join them. And he sort of looked like he was going along with this for the moment. I'll come back to that. To issue an ultimatum to Putin that either you accept the unconditional ceasefire or else there would be sanctions against Russia. So there was a masterful move, diplomatic move by President Putin when he responded to it, saying, yes, we will have negotiations, but it would be on his terms, on Putin's terms. In other words, no unconditional. There will be conditions, and the conditions must be worked out between Ukraine and Russia on the format of negotiations. And the way he presented it was masterfully that we continue where we stopped in 2022 in Istanbul. So by that message, it was very, very well done. He sent a message to the Europeans saying, look, you're not going to dictate to me when and how and with whom we're going to negotiate. We can continue where we left off. And it's a reminder that the reason they were broke was because Prime Minister Johnson of that time of Britain came in and persuaded Zelensky to fight on. Now, another masterful stroke in this response was that he's undercut all those who were saying if Russia wins over Ukraine, it's going to keep marching into Europe, because Putin said, look, this is our conditions: 4 provinces, neutrality for Ukraine, demilitarization, denazification, and then we can have peace tomorrow, which means that Ukraine as a state remains. And that's the most important message, that you don't have to worry for the war to go on into Europe by simply accepting our terms. So this was a very clever response to Trump and to European allies of Trump. But my focus here is on the domestic issues, which means that the mood in Russia is changing, and this is what's new. The mood in Russia is changing in the sense that many people are louder and louder asking a question: why should we stop at the 4 provinces? Why should we stop in the conditions when European Union is openly eager to continue to arm Ukraine? What difference for us does it make if it is the Americans or the Europeans? If they still are going to arm Ukraine, if Ukraine still wants to go on fighting, there's no guarantee that some time from now they wouldn't do another invasion of Kursk province or any other province bordering on Russia. So the threat from the Russian point of view continues. But what's more important is that the mood in the army, and if you, which I follow all the time, the reports of military correspondents and others, and in some talk shows, the generals that I refer to often in my videos, they are saying that one of the generals said that his understanding of the mood in the army is that if they are forced to accept a deal with Trump, which is not in Russia's national interest, which abandons something for the sake of a deal, then there's, he says, many, many dots. In other words, he didn't want to explain what would happen if that happens. But it is showing that there's a growing resistance in Russia to a deal which would be short of total victory. In other words, what some of these people are now saying is that the 4 provinces isn't enough. Russia, to assure its security in view of European hostility and that of Britain, needs to take all of Novorossiya, which means Odessa and Kharkov, in addition to the 4 provinces. And it is much more important, a regime change. There's nothing that could be dealt with current regime, which means Zelensky's regime. You have to change a government in Ukraine with which we can live in peace and hopefully good neighborly relations in the best possible scenario. That's the kind of pressures are in Moscow. So that's the army. Now there's another trend, of course, in Russia. These are the business community and those that are openly wishing for a deal because they're eager to begin all this trade and all this lifting of sanctions, and they're eager to make money with all these projects that they hope will come with Trump. And therefore, for me as an analyst of Russian politics, what's important is that the coalition that Putin held together for 25 years between those who are eager for Western business and contacts and the business community are kind of looking to the West, and the patriotic community and the communists and nationalists who are interested in one thing only, which is complete victory all the way to Kiev. So Putin has been holding it together. How long he's going to hold it together is not clear. Probably he will manage, but one cannot ignore the fact that there is a divergence of interests among the Russian society, among those who want to go all the way to Kiev and put the end to that regime and a total victory, and those who are willing to compromise in exchange for a lifting of sanctions and recognition of Russia's interests and so on. So these are the pressures on Putin. Now let me address those that are pressures on President Trump. Now, as you all know, there are 80 senators who are pushing very hard, led by Lindsey Graham, to impose secondary sanctions on all those countries that deal with Russia. In addition, just the 21st of May, there were hearings at the Foreign Relations Committee, and they were pushing Rubio to acknowledge that Putin is a war criminal and that Putin is an aggressor. Now, if I were there, I would tell him, no, he's not an aggressor because he did not invade Ukraine. He provided help to the 2 republics that seceded from Ukraine as a result of the coup d'etat that occurred in 2014. So it was not any aggression against Ukraine. It was help to the secessionist republics, not number 2. And then number 1 and number 2 is his claim that Putin is a war criminal because he kidnapped 20,000 Ukrainian children. All of that is full of nonsense because they were not kidnapped. They were evacuated from Kherson. And Kherson is by Russian constitution, and the people there voted to join Russia. Therefore, from the Russian point of view, they evacuated children to save them from bombardments of Ukrainian artillery. So what they present as a war crime isn't a war crime. Moreover, to declare somebody a war criminal, there has to be a court. Before that, it's innocent until proven guilty. These are one of the cherished Western values that the West is so proud of. So anyway, the point is that Trump is under tremendous pressure. And there were interpretations in the media that he's sort of one time he's with Witkoff and Vance, which is favoring a deal with Russia, and the next day he's favoring Rubio and others who want a tougher stand against Russia and force all kinds of sanctions on her. Now, my personal interpretation is that that Trump has made up his mind a long time ago, and that he's simply afraid, or he's playing the game not to be accused of being Putin's stooge, and therefore he's sort of playing along as if he's listening to those who oppose a deal with Russia. In fact, I think that Witkoff and he personally, in the last conversation that lasted 2 hours, have worked out the fundamentals of an agreement. And both Trump and Putin want this agreement very much, which would be a fair compromise. And as a result of that, there would be a new beginning in Russian-American relations, and possibly all kinds of contracts, mutually beneficial, and so on and so forth. But because of this ardent opposition in the Senate, and because of the European allies and in NATO partners are so absolutely, totally against any compromise with Russia, he has to play along, and he has to act as if there is going to be some threats of this and that against Russia. My sense is that this is all a game, and that Putin and Trump have made already an agreement. Whether they will be able to implement it, we shall see. And now I turn to the third part, and that is Zelensky's pressures. I discussed Zelensky very much in my previous video about his mirage of victory and all this. But what's important today is that there are serious pressures on Zelensky at home. And that is because the front is collapsing. The desertion is rising, and now he has a double threat. On the one hand, the nationalists are threatening him that if he signs anything at all and concedes any territory, he's going to be in big trouble. He may be overthrown, he may be killed, and he knows it. And that's why he takes such an ardent view, that we will never accept anything, loss of territory in Russia, to Russia. And that's because he has no choice. If he acts any differently, he's a dead man. Now, on the other hand, what's even more interesting, that there are new voices, and not so new. Sometimes these are the old voices, but in other words, we've heard those before. But there are those that argue that the best security for Ukraine would be not in a strong army and not in military supplies from the US or from Europe, but in making a regime change in Ukraine and getting rid of the Banderovites nationalists and of Zelensky regime, and then creating a kind of a new Ukraine that would recognize Russian minority and recognize the equality of languages, and would establish a good neighborly relations with Russia. And in that case, Russia may even be willing to contribute to its to restoring the damage done during the war, and so on. And to my greatest surprise, this point of view has recently been promoted by Arestovich. And now I know Arestovich is not a very reliable politician, and he changes his views and so on, but he is a politician, and when he voices these kinds of views, that means that he thinks that there is a constituency in Ukraine who want to listen to that message. You have to make peace with Russia, you have to stop all this nationalist hysteria, attacks on Russian heritage and Russian language and Russian population, and then establish genuine peace that is not dependent on Western guns and giveaways, but on neighborly relations with Russia could be long lasting. So these are the kinds of pressures Zelensky is under. And to finally to conclude, my conclusion is basically the West doesn't understand that the best deal that they can have is with Putin right now. Because if they reject it, and it seems like they're encouraging Zelensky to reject it, what happens next is going to be much worse. What happens next is that the offensive is going to continue. And it's going to continue on and on until Odessa is taken and Kharkov is taken, and if need be, Kiev is taken as well. And in that case, they will they will lose even more and still come to the same result, which is they would have to conclude peace on Russia's terms. Okay, this is my assessment for today, and thank you very much. Please continue writing your excellent notes, questions, and commentaries, and I will see you in my next commentary very soon. Thank you.